This is Generation Health. Every week we bring you the news, cutting-edge research, and time-tested best practices to help you live a long, healthy life. With the tools and information available today, this generation has the potential to be the healthiest in human history. Following in the footsteps of our founder, Dante DiMatteo, we are the second generation of a family dedicated to helping you live better and longer. Sitting across from me, Mr. Dante DiMatteo, registered pharmacist, certified, board-certified clinical nutritionist. My apologies, sir. How are you?
Very good. How are you, Tyler?
I'm good. And to my right, Dante DiMatteo, registered pharmacist, certified strength and conditioning specialist.
Yes, sir.
So there's no board involved in the certification?
There is.
There's got to be I think there's a board. I forget.
So you're a board certified.
That was a term my dad always liked to add in at the beginning of that. I like that.
Was the board certified?
Yes, yeah.
I am Tyler Andrews, and I am the producer. But first, we are going to talk about, we've got a ton of stuff today. Really, really big topic. Kind of controversial. There's invariably going to be somebody who doesn't like what we have to say, but that's okay. We're just doing the best with what we know. We're going to talk about balanced diet and what that looks like. This is a big question. This can go a ton of places. We're not going to be able to cover everything, but try to get some general principles. We've also got a question from a listener. But first, and this is a big question too.
Yeah.
I love this. I heard this somewhere else and I thought, this is great. I got to steal this. What story is being ignored by the press that will be studied by historians?
Well, I guess I'm going to go after the heavy hitter here, and it's not because I have a extremely firm black or white opinion on this, honestly. But yeah, there's nothing I would like to know more than about the mRNA vaccines and about the COVID vaccine.
Yep.
I think that there's so much of the concern, even if you're kind of in the middle on this, that greater good can cover up potentially some of the side effects and issues that we see. I mean, for me, I'm just going to be honest, I got the initial 2-phase of vaccine. To me, all the things regarding vaccine and medications, et cetera, is always risk reward. And I do the best I can to evaluate that with what I know. And at the time, people have lost their jobs. Life is upside down. I'm in healthcare. I'm with elderly employees. I'm with elderly customers. To me, the risk reward was to do it.
Yeah.
As time's gone on and we've learned how to treat the disease better, we've learned more. I didn't get the boosters. So again, I'm kind of in the middle. And nowadays it's always, if you got the vaccine, you've got tainted blood, or if you didn't get if you haven't had 4 shots, you're part of the problem, and you're not helping your fellow man. So with a lot of these things, I fall in between, and that was my process of risk reward.
And you feel like that's something that the press, I mean, I know there's certain parts of the press that talk about it, very ideological press.
Yeah.
But the general population, there's a lot of questions that are still out there.
Right.
And nobody's talking about it.
And unfortunately, the smaller scale you go, the people on Twitter, single doctors, et cetera, you get more of the extreme views. And the higher up you go, you get nothing possibly counteracting the mainline story. Yeah. And so where in the middle do we get some people that are objectively going to look at this, A, and B, it's not necessarily their fault, because a lot of this stuff you do need long-term data. And we're still not quite at the point where you've got long-term data on these. So again, I'm not here to push one way or the other or go into all that stuff, but that's, again, my general answer to the question and my general kind of thoughts on things. So
fair enough. Dante, what's being ignored?
Honestly, I could not come up with anything. I'm sorry.
That's all right. No, man.
I tried to think of something somewhat humorous, but nothing too good.
There's nothing funny happening right now.
No, like I'm trying to think of things that bother me, annoy
genocide, plagues. Things aren't funny.
Like historians, they would look, maybe they'll look back and like you have to take your shoes off when you walk through the line at the airport. Like like things that they're gonna like. Why was it really that they can't pick that up on the thing that scans?
Why does the shoes hide so well? Like, what about the shoe makes it hide so well? Like explosive.
The press is they're not talking about these things.
As the guy that's traveling most frequently in this room, I got the TSA pre-check and I don't have to take my shoes off, and it's fabulous. It is worth every penny I spent to do it.
So you had to get the TSA screening?
Yes.
So did they ask you about like your shoes?
No, it's bizarre. They just check your birth certificate, make sure that you don't have like outstanding warrants and that you haven't been associating with terrorists, and then they just go, yep, you're safe. And so I don't have to, I can wear my belt through the metal detector. I can wear my watch through the metal detector. They don't even make you take your shoes. None of that stuff. It's almost like it used to be. And I don't know. This is your
Sorry.
answer. No, I'm taking over. My bad.
What do you got?
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
A week ago, I would have said Chinese spy balloons are being ignored. I think those are a really big problem, but apparently we're going to talk about those now. No, I think culture wars in general, and maybe not culture wars, that's the wrong way to say it because that has such a negative connotation, but the reality that we are living, we no longer have the same core values as a society. And I think that is a greater root problem than people realize. Wow, this got real deep and philosophical. I promise next time we'll talk about something goofy and silly. It is fascinating to me because I think if we don't have the same core values, we will not end up in the same place. And it's very hard to hold together a cohesive society when we're not aiming for the same goals. Does that make sense? And I think 100 years from now, why did America fall apart? That's probably it. And we didn't talk about it. We got upset about, whatever, the Grammys or some music video or whatever. And that was the surface level of a much deeper problem that we weren't talking about. That's my thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good stuff.
It is.
I don't know.
I mean, that seems like that's always been out there, though, that there's always been this separation but it seems like it's just wider and it's more intense and more vitriol on each side.
Yes. We used to be able to say, we have the same goal, right? We want fewer poor people. Okay, well, how do you want to do that? Lower taxes or subsidized lifestyle, take care of the poor from government or reduce the tax burden, right? Those are two different ways of approaching the same problem, and we work together and figure it out. We don't even agree on what the problem is anymore, let alone how to solve it. And I think that's the part that scares me a little bit.
Sounds like you're ready for your political run.
Yeah.
I'll be announcing soon. I've formed an exploratory committee. No, my wife would never allow me to do that. That would be the worst possible thing. Lose all your friends.
You do well in Tennessee, though.
You will. Let's talk about this stuff. So we have a question from Deanna. You can email us questions. We love those. Email them to questions@askjoedimatteo.com. Deanna said, I was diagnosed over 20 years ago with
Sjögren's.
Sjögren's. Is there a supplement I could benefit by taking that would help with the symptoms?
Yeah. So just looking at a quick definition from the American College of Rheumatology, they described it as a systemic autoimmune rheumatic disease that affects the entire body. And then it manifests as inflammation of the salivary and lacrimal, or the eyes, those glands, most notably, and can lead to some of the following hallmark symptoms that we'll look at.
Okay, so you said rheumatic, so that means inflammatory, right? Inflammation. And it's systemic, so it's throughout the entire body, but it's specifically affecting salivary glands and eyes.
Yes, those are two of the main areas that we'll see various symptoms occur.
Okay,
but it has the potential to manifest in musculoskeletal pain, joint pain, stiffness, brain fog. Vaginal dryness. There's a whole host of things, nasal dryness, but the top two symptoms that often guide diagnosis would be dry eyes and dry mouth.
Okay.
So you got to kind of mention those at the top. And as far as what we recommend to her, we'll just assume that she's dealing with those top couple for sure.
If she's been dealing with this for 20 years, it's probably safe to assume that she's seen her doctor about it many times, and it's probably, are there medications? Are there? She's looking for supplements, but
yeah. So the one thing I wanted to add to that is, from a diagnostic perspective, you could see somebody that has primary Sjögren's syndrome. So the cause is maybe a bit unclear. So that's the primary thing that's occurring. Secondary Sjögren's could be as a result of different underlying disorders that the individual might have, or maybe a medication contributing. But even looking at secondary Sjögren's, that's the link that we'll see with other, notable autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and, autoimmune thyroid disease. That's typically where we see it. And there's definitely a link there.
Secondary meaning it's not the reason it is it's consequence of some other greater issue like lupus or rheumatoid arthritis.
Yeah.
Okay.
They say up to like 50% of cases, often are associated with an underlying, autoimmune disease.
Yeah, I see 14 to 18% of people with lupus also have Sjögren's.
Oh, wow.
Because again, just kind of in the broadest way, the mechanism of how you get Sjögren's. We don't know why when there's an autoimmune disease and your body is self-attacking, why does it manifest as multiple sclerosis in somebody or lupus in somebody or Sjögren's? That part we don't know, but the biomarkers are often very similar. And that's, again, the core thing is that it's the body attacking.
Okay.
So it makes sense mechanistically why somebody would have lupus or RA, rheumatoid arthritis, and then have Sjögren's, secondarily. Or, some people, maybe it's milder for whatever reason, the body is attacking just, I don't want to say just because it can be very uncomfortable to say the least, even in its, most basic, tear duct and saliva form, can be very uncomfortable, but at its most basic, we don't know why, that would occur.
But again, so you're just making sure I'm understanding these correctly, because this is something I've never heard of. It's a syndrome, and syndromes are collections of symptoms, but not necessarily a cause. So when you say it's Sjögren's syndrome, we're saying it's just this specific collection of symptoms, but it could be from some other. Got it. Okay. All right. Cool. So what are the standard treatments? She's presumably already seen her doctor. What has she likely gone through or is dealing with?
Most likely would be a DMARD, disease modifying anti-rheumatic drug.
Okay.
And they basically are modifying the immune system. They're used for any of the conditions we named above, RA, MS, et cetera, like hydroxychloroquine or methotrexate.
Okay.
So, if you've got more of again, I hate to use the word mild, but if you're not dealing with severe fatigue and joint pain, potentially with some saliva substitutes and some, refreshed tears, things like that, you can get by without having to take such a heavy hitting drug. But if it's debilitating, in the sense of you're dealing with a lot of those secondary symptoms, maybe we'll call them, then you become more of a candidate to end up wanting to go on a drug like that. But you got to live and you got to be able to deal with this. So, nothing wrong with doing those drugs, but if you can get by without them, again, if you can do some of those other interventions, maybe a couple supplements we'll go into later can at least be of assistance, not maybe a, night or day change. That's basically what you'd be looking at. Hydroxychloroquine, methotrexate.
For sure. The big thing is there's no matter which medication, over the counter supplement that you end up taking, there's no curative treatment.
Right.
So even if you're on one of the DMARDs or hydroxychloroquine or some prednisone, they're not going to cure the underlying, but they help to manage the symptoms that are occurring. And so the key, the name of the game with Sjögren's is managing the symptoms as best as possible, and not to just manage them for the sake of managing them, but because if you're not treating the dry eye, if you're not treating the dry mouth and those sorts of things, that's when you can see, corneal damage, optic neuritis, things that are more serious. And so if you can keep those at bay, it's important to find whatever works for you. And often it takes a multi-pronged approach. And even looking at the oral implications of Sjögren's, you're thinking to yourself, well, dry mouth, it's got to be pretty unpleasant, but
drink some water. What's the big deal?
What's the worst that's going to happen? You're way more prone to, different mouth infections in large salivary glands, gingivitis, tooth decay. And so there's even prescription toothpaste that will be utilized for pretty much anybody that has these symptoms. It's just the benefits greatly outweigh the risks in that case.
Wow.
So it's super, super important to manage the symptoms.
It's almost like your body is designed to do all these things together. And when you take a piece out, all of a sudden you have issues.
Yeah, body produces a lot of saliva.
Wow.
And if you've got something that's shutting that down to a large extent, that's a good point of the oral issues you can have for sure.
Definitely.
Okay, so you talked about the medications she's probably dealing with. And she said, I love that you were pointing out the symptoms. She said, is there a supplement I could benefit by taking that would help with the symptoms? So it seems like she knows this is, I guess at 20 years in, she knows this is not going away. Are there any supplements? Is this something that can be supplemented to aid?
Like I kind of alluded to, there are some things you can do. Omega-3s, that's going to help with inflammation as well. So especially if you're having some of the joint pain and things like that, but there's some data about omega-3s, like 800 to 1600 milligrams twice a day. Vitamin E, 400 units a day. Just be careful if you're on any, blood thinning medication, because if you take both of those supplements, they can have a little bit of an antiplatelet effect. So if you're, because this does often affect, because one thing kind of forgot to mention here, there's a genetic link to it, but also estrogen deficiency. You see it a little more in women. So estrogen deficiency has, maybe a contributing factor. So a lot of times here you are dealing with either severity or onset a little bit later in life, especially for a woman. So I do want to bring up the medications, because that could certainly be something that you're on as well as you're, potentially aging and dealing with that. So just watch if you take both of those supplements, if you have it, and, Eliquis, Xarelto, just watch those. Also NAC, 600 milligrams twice a day, and vitamin D. Something we're actually going to be talking about here a little more in depth, but something that personally I would recommend with any autoimmune condition. Again, not as a panacea, cure all by any means, but just as something that has shown to have immunomodulatory effects, that we would recommend you take that, get a level, and then dose according to level. That's in a way. And again, the level is not a perfect measure, but it's the best we have. And with a lot of supplements and nutrients, we don't have any real measure of it. At least go with what you can and get a level and have a better idea of what your need may be.
I want to just add one thing to what Joey said as well, specifically with the omega-3s. And so in addition to the anti-inflammatory effect, the evidence is mixed, but it seems that it might have a beneficial effect on dry eye symptoms specifically. So in addition to the, the underlying that's maybe occurring, it's not a bad thing to consider either, adding some extra salmon to your diet or supplementing with some extra omega-3s.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Especially if you are noticing more of the dry eye issues. And then there was, as far as like a lifestyle perspective, not necessarily a treatment. Those with Sjögren's, they're a little more likely to end up with specific lymphomas. The specific one is B-cell non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And it seems as though it is fairly treatable if one is diagnosed. It's just important to, keep an eye on swollen glands around the neck and the face. And so all of this, in addition to managing your symptoms, monitoring and keeping up with your eye appointments and your dental appointments and checking for swollen glands, not to be over the top, but just to, again, view this whole thing holistically. It's just as important as, making sure you're hitting the right over the counters and supplements and such.
Definitely. And we're always want you to advocate for your own health. And I think that's a huge point, but especially maybe if you have one of the, again, we use the word milder for lack of a better term, and you say, hey, I'm kind of getting by with basic, again, we'll just simplify it as refresh tears and saliva substitute. Be aware over time, if you've had this for 10, 20 years, that you do want to get checked for those kind of things, and be aware of the risk that you are at, regardless of severity, for something like lymphoma, because there's a clear link that you have it. Lymph node swelling is, the most simple thing you can do to check, but also obviously getting checked by your doctor.
Knowing your own risks seems like a really good idea, no matter what
that's
it
a great point.
Yes. And this one might come as a surprise, but because there are such strong fatigue-related symptoms that can be associated with this, the Sjögren's Foundation, who has come up with like a pretty extensive set of guidelines, and for the fatigue symptoms specifically, they recommend exercise. So I know that, that's definitely shocking that I threw that in there, but that is a massive lifestyle treatment or intervention that will often be recommended.
Okay.
So keep it moving.
So very cool. So Deanna, exercise if you're not doing that. And then that was a whole bunch of supplements that Joey suggested. That's very cool. You also mentioned salmon, which that leads perfectly into the other big topic of the day. We want to talk about balanced diet. I could pull up studies here about how confused we all are on what we should be eating. This is a week does not go by that a new article doesn't come out telling you that coffee is going to kill you, and eggs are incredibly dangerous, but they're also the only thing you need to make sure you eat every single day. And butter is the best thing there is, and also the worst thing there is. So you should never use it. Use margarine, but don't use margarine because it's artificial seed oils. And so you shouldn't do that. Like this stuff, constantly, there are new studies telling us what we should and shouldn't eat. 100 years ago, you ate what was available. It wasn't, you didn't have a lot of options.
It's also natural though, but yeah.
Yeah. So now that we have all of these conflicting studies, let's stake out some territory.
Mm-hmm.
But let's start with, why is this so confusing? Why can't we get clear answers? Why is it that, why can't we trust the FDA to tell us that the food pyramid is the right way to eat? And then, 20 years later, oops, sorry, that wasn't so right.
I think to boil it down, randomized controlled trials are the gold standard of trials. And it's nearly impossible to do that when you're studying a diet.
So randomized controlled trials are where it's a blind study, so the person doesn't know what they're
That
getting.
may be a little harder here. Blind is definitely part of that. Blinded, randomized controlled trials. That can be a little tough because obviously you know what you're eating.
Yeah.
Versus, you take a white pill versus a white pill. So that is an important part.
Right.
But even if we forego that, basically the core thing is separating into two groups. Okay. You'd give one certain type of diet, one another.
Right.
And you study them over time.
Yeah.
But the issue with that becomes, how do you guarantee what they're eating?
Right.
This is not come in for an hour, take a couple tests and take a pill. This is your entire day. And the other thing is, you can't do this for 6 months,
right.
And believe that the diet is affecting all this. So you could look at certain things, but if you're just looking at generally, how do I eat over the course of my life?
Right.
And what's the best way to do it? It's impossible to account for honesty in the study. Exactly what the parameters are. What are you looking for? What diets are you choosing? Do you separate 12 groups and give them 12 different types of diet?
Right.
Just the scale of what you'd be studying is so difficult. So we're constantly dealing with these little studies about specific things and about a given condition or a given food.
Right.
And then that's something that could lead to that push and pull, because you're looking at butter for this issue, you're looking at margarine for this issue,
right?
And it may help this thing versus what butter does. So now you've got these bold headlines telling you conflicting things. Just to wrap that up, what we have is observational studies. So we go back and look at people who eat Mediterranean diets, et cetera, et cetera. But those are helpful, but they're never going to be as helpful and as conclusive as a true randomized controlled trial would be. So
what you're saying is we would need to effectively have 1,000 people from birth, and some of them eat way 1 and some of them eat way 2, and we never allow them to deviate. Mm-hmm. They have to strictly adhere their entire lives. And then we could look at it and go, oh, look, over the course of 50 years, eating McDonald's every day is a bad idea.
Yeah. And even within that, so you say whatever, fruits and vegetables and lean meats for the one group, that could be the most core thing.
Sure.
But how much of those things? And then even if you could do that, the design would be so difficult. You'd have to really try to break them into, I would assume 6, 12, 15 groups to try to measure what the different ways of eating are.
Not to mention, there's some ethical issues with doing that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
And even from a historical perspective on all that, you're ultimately, we're trying to, like Joey said, we're trying to treat a lot of these nutritional interventions, these dietary interventions. We're trying to treat them the same way in that we would treat a new drug trial. And it's just it's apples and oranges. And so it's not to say totally that these observational trials are worthless because we can't prove causation. We do have to just sort of take everything that we learn from them with a grain of salt. And then in whatever capacity we can lump that into an eventual randomized control trial or something with a little more specific intervention, then that's ultimately the goal. But there's just an inherent limitation.
Yeah.
And then historically speaking, we were able to get these definitive answers in nutritional studies because in the 1700s, scurvy, which I'm sure you've heard 100 times, was the deficiency of vitamin C. How did we figure that out? There was a scientist at the time. He split people into 2 groups, and he found that the one that got oranges and lemons, their bleeding gums and their teeth falling out and these issues, they all started to get better. And so right now we're not dealing with these we still are, there are still low income and, third world countries and such that face these nutrient deficiencies. But now what we're seeing is we're trying to apply the same set of rules on these long, chronic, slow developing diseases with a singular nutrient or a singular diet, that it's just, the playing field is not leveled. It's
so much more complicated.
It's way more complicated. And then even just the way that, food matrices are more important than looking at the singular nutrient within the food. Like, there's just so much that we don't understand. There's so many things that are occurring, at a deeper level that's just too hard to parse out in scientific research. So it's not that it's not trustworthy. It's just that you are dealing with a whole separate set of rules.
Okay. Yeah, and then back to the old thing, conflicts of interest. Yep. I saw this one thing here for Nestle funded 76 studies on food, because they're obviously have their hands in not just the chocolate, but in so many different things. 70 of the 76 had results that favored Nestle and the types of food that they're producing.
Shocking.
So, where do you go to look? And sometimes it's hidden because a subsidiary is paying for it. You don't really know it's Nestle. It's hard to find out who's funding these studies. Well, it's not as simple. It doesn't say study by Nestle at the top of it,
because who's going to invest the money into researching a food or a diet or whatever?
Yeah. Industries. Dairy industry is going to fund this study, and it's going to say milk's good. And that doesn't mean that it's bad. But the beef producers are going to fund red meat studies, and it doesn't mean red meat's bad. It's just, again, it's become so complicated to parse through all of it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So you're not giving me much hope. Okay.
Starting with the issues. That was the first question.
Yeah.
I mean, there are, metabolic type ward studies where they can go live somewhere for 3 weeks and they give you a certain diet and do these sorts of things, but it's hard to extrapolate that into a purely real life setting. And then also they have even improved the survey methods that are available for like free living studies. So if they are trying a certain diet, or they're trying the Mediterranean, or they're trying that, they have better ways that, they have dietary specialists working more closely and more frequently with study participants. There's different ways that they can account for some of the error. Mm-hmm. So it's not totally hopeless, but it's that you have to always start with this baked in layer of error, especially when you're looking at, the free living studies. Plus, human nature is to underreport.
Yes.
So if you're in one of these studies, it's just the human condition for whatever moral reason or whatever psychological reason, I didn't eat that much steak this month, or that,
I've done that with myself when I'm trying to record. I'll get a wild hair and go, okay, I'm going to record everything I ate just to see what I'm doing in a week. And by the end of the first day, I'm going, well, it was just a handful of chips. Is that even worth recording? Nah, I'm not going to worry about that. What was it? 2 ounces? That's nothing, and it adds up. And if you're doing that, you're trying to find causational relations. Wow. Okay. Well, that's not helpful. That doesn't. So what you're saying is this is hopeless. There's no idea. We have eat whatever you want. There's no proper guidelines.
Yeah.
Obviously that's not what you're saying. But what is the solution? What is the, do I need to go back to what my grandmother did and just do that? Should we all be growing our own food and only eating the things we grew in our own backyard? What is the solution?
So it's a good question.
Are there some guidelines, some rough guidelines we can follow?
I guess we'll start with kind of this fundamental level of thinking. Instead of looking for, let's say, the best diet, just looking for certain patterns that lend themselves to, better outcomes, better health metrics, better longevity, or whatever the metric that you're looking at. Just looking for specific patterns versus this grouping of 10 things that are always checked and they're always done 100%.
Right.
Versus, looking at this as more of a spectrum of things that we can look at and be mindful of.
Okay.
And so along the way, just look, different resources, different people, different organizations. Alan Aragon, he has a book called Flexible Dieting. The Stronger by Science organization, Barbell Medicine guys. There's a food and nonprofit organization, Old Ways. I've even looked at the World Health Organization and their healthy diet indicators. Yeah. I've looked at the USDA dietary guideline for Americans. And so some of those you might trigger somebody. Some of those I don't trust this group, or I didn't really like what this guy said. But the goal is to try and find common ground.
I was going to say the overlap.
Yeah. Like
where all these things seem to agree, that's probably a good place to start.
Exactly. So you look at all these things, and the goal was not to create shoulds and should nots, but to highlight the common ground.
Okay.
So based upon that, I would say maybe there's 8 to 10 points. Maybe we won't cover them all. Maybe we will. Just certain points that I think we could start with. So the first one, these are more broad principles, and then eventually we'll get down to some more nutrient specific aspects.
So give me some principles.
Sure. The first one is individualize.
Okay.
And so the key with this is just acknowledging that an individual has personal preference for what they're eating. And so this is also something that will drive adherence in the long term. So counting calories and following this diet to the T or totally disrupting your way of living is not the surefire way to maintain long-term adherence.
Right.
So an example would be there's two people. Somebody prefers high fat, low carb. Somebody prefers low fat, high carb.
Right.
It doesn't matter. If wherever you fall in that spectrum, lean into that.
Right.
And then, and just kind of go from there. There's cultural and there's familial implications. So your family background, do you have a big family? Are you cooking for multiple people? Are you trying to, set an example for your kids?
Right.
Are you Italian? Are you Irish?
Right.
Are you African-American? Like what sorts of inputs are factoring in the way you shop? And so many of those things I'm even neglecting here.
Yeah.
For sure. So the first one is just individualized.
So individualized, what else?
Second one would be build awareness around your caloric or energy needs.
Okay. So figure it out. See what you need.
Yes.
And how do you do that quickly?
Yes. So there's no way around the energy balance equation. So why? We know that excess body fat is a driver of a whole host of health issues. So often that's the starting point. How will you know where to start? So what I would recommend pretty much everybody doing is to just find their waist circumference.
Yeah.
And so this isn't the size of your pants. This is a separate measurement that's like typically done around the navel or the belly button.
Yeah, around your belly button.
So start there. This will maybe dictate where your caloric needs will start. Males, the cut points that we're looking at, and there's some ethnic considerations as well.
Sure.
Males are aiming for less than 37 inches. Women aiming for less than 31.5 inches. And so the extent at which you are above these cut points may determine the amount that you would theoretically have to restrict your calories.
Okay.
And so even though I'm telling you to be mindful of your caloric needs,
right,
this isn't going to be a math lesson on how to do that. So ultimately what you want to do is just go on the NIH body weight calculator. You just put in your weight, height, some things about you, your activity level.
Yep.
That'll just give you a start point.
Yep.
And from there, you can, reach out to us with more questions, but that at least gives you the framework as far as
a starting
your
place.
Your total intake.
Okay. So I can do that. I'll get a number and go, okay. Cause the government we always talk about a 2,000 calorie diet. Mm-hmm. And what you're saying is not everybody needs a 2,000. Some people need more, some people need less. Mm-hmm. And a good way to figure that out is with that calculator as a starting point. And then do you experiment a little bit? Do you try eating exactly that and see what happens to your weight over a week or two? Is that what you do?
Yes. Ultimately, you're sort of the test dummy for your, for the habits that you're
because it's individualized.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, there was a study just to dovetail on that in Israel, 800 people over a week continuously monitoring their blood sugars. So that's one marker that you can test short term.
Sure.
Obviously, it's very important over time,
right,
but that you can at least, if again, doing a small scale randomized controlled trial to test going forward, they gave people the identical meals. Okay. But they tested again, their blood sugar over the course of that week, eating the exact same things, that wildly different blood sugar numbers.
Wow.
So even just your body's an individualized response to eating the same food. And that can affect why somebody's, for example, carbohydrate need may be higher or lower.
Okay. So it really does matter person to person. You've got to experiment with some of this stuff.
And within a week, I buy it because I think you could have people come in for a week and eat the same food and hunker down and do that right.
Right.
I mean, not to say there wasn't some cheating, and it was 800 people. So even if 600-700 of them were totally by the book, you're still going to see, I think, some value in that.
Right. Interesting.
So the other, and for those of you at home listening to this, just arbitrarily knowing, what your caloric intake would be to maintain your weight, let's say.
Right.
I know that doesn't do a whole lot for you. Again, it's more or less the start of an educational process for yourself.
Right.
And so some of the points that we'll get to, again, more of the nutrient specific points, that'll help you round out what those numbers are.
Right.
And so you don't have to start weighing things and measuring things right away. In theory, by hitting some of these other points, it will get you. It's just funny how it'll sort of get you near that number.
Right.
All right. And then again, you're maybe every 3 weeks, 2 weeks, maybe you have a progress photo, or you're measuring your waist, or you're looking at the way your muscles look in the mirror, something, some sort of measure that's building in self-efficacy, self-awareness on what's going on.
So again, what we're talking about here is not, this is how you should eat if you want to lose weight, or this is how you should eat if you want to get muscular. We're talking about broad brush. Here's where you start, and then do some observation of yourself and see, oh, okay, I was following this pattern. I was eating this many calories, and I've lost 1 pound or 2 pounds over the course of a month. Okay. So then that means I'm probably in calorie deficit by about XYZ amount. You can do the math and figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's fine if that's what you want to do.
Yep.
And vice versa, that you can figure it out. You're just trying to figure out a starting place where you are. Got it. Okay. What other principles have we got?
There's only one or two more, sort of global principles here. This is one that's directly from Old Ways, which is that nonprofit. They have a nice consensus statement just talking about diet as a whole, which is non-controversial, very, they're ones that seek common ground, which we talked about initially.
Right. Yeah.
So this principle is just called good times 3. Is it good? Is what you're eating good for human health? Is it good for the planet and sustainability? And also make sure it tastes good. Make sure you enjoy it. So pretty broad in a sense. Again, there's a million ways that you can sort of measure whether or not something is good for human health. I think some of us have an idea of what choices are and aren't. As far as sustainability goes, I only throw that out there because I'm looking to improve upon that myself. I'm trying to look for strategies that if it helps sort of the bigger picture of our food supply, and for not just for me, but for my kids and my grandkids, then I'm all ears. I'm interested to see what's out there in that perspective. But what I am actively doing to maybe try to acknowledge that fact is just try to incorporate a little more variability in what I'm eating. So that's a big component in and of itself. And so what I mean by that is, instead of eating ground beef, breakfast, lunch, and dinner 7 days a week, there's ground chicken. Maybe on Saturdays it's beef or steak, a little more seafood.
Yeah.
Maybe a little more plant-based proteins, maybe tofu, eggs, Greek yogurts. Just the more things that you sort of expose yourself to, the better. There's just not one meat or one vegetable or one source of fat that's best. You try to cover all bases.
Okay. And that is a good difference from where things were 100 years ago. You only ate what was available to you. And so if you were a rancher in Texas, you ate beef all the time. But now we have access to all of those things. And you're saying it is good for us to vary our intake as much as possible.
It's good for you, and theoretically it's good for the
planet,
the broader food scale.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Very cool. Any other major principles we want to talk about?
The last major principle, which kind of just throwing this in there as a bonus. Old Ways also has a nice point that stuck out to me, and it's called the compared to what approach. And so when you're considering for yourself, or you're helping somebody in your family, when you're considering a dietary change, addition, or subtraction, you want to frame it in such a way that is more practical. So instead of saying, drink less soda, say, I'm going to drink calorie-free beverages instead of soda.
Okay.
Or you shouldn't eat red meat. It's, why don't you replace your red meat intake a couple times per week with that piece of fish that you like?
Sure.
Do something with those recommendations instead of saying no sugar, no red meat, no fatty steaks, whatever. There's things that there's always context to it. So as compared to what?
Yeah.
If I remove this, am I going to get healthier? I don't know. What are you going to replace it with?
Right.
If you say I eat steak 7 days a week and my LDL is high, I'm going to stop eating steak. Well, compared to what? What if you replace it with all mostly refined sugars, carbohydrates? Well, we know for pretty confidently that that's also going to negatively affect your cardiovascular health.
Right.
So as compared to what? You know, when you're having a conversation with somebody, those are the opportunities that you can find common ground for sure.
That makes sense. We're not trying to say prescriptively, this is the diet you should eat and everybody should eat like this. We're trying to help people make sustainable changes that they can continue with throughout the course of their life and build upon and improve, moving better and better compared to what they did the day before, and making those big, broad, exclusionary statements of never again should you ever taste this thing. That's just asking for non-compliance.
This goes back to, what we were talking about with the drawbacks in nutritional studies is that everything is sensationalized. So whether it's the title of a headline of a new study that makes its way to the lay press, or a sensationalized diet camp, carnivore, or you see the vegans and the carnivores going at it all the time.
Yes.
That's sort of, to me, it's a red flag. Like, there's plenty of opportunities that those people on both sides can find common ground.
Sure.
Like, I'm sorry, those that are saying plants are toxic on the carnivore side, it's just, how could we believe that? It's not that they're bad people,
right?
But I'm sure it's for clicks and for whatever else. And there's plenty of people on the other side that have issues that are just beyond the scope of this conversation. But beware of that. Like, this is an area that it's okay to like live a little in the gray. And so there's even, I guess this sort of segues into one of the specific nutrient recommendations I was going to suggest.
Yeah.
And this is common in the American guidelines. This is common in the the cardiovascular literature. It's in the World Health Organization, and that's to roughly try to consume less than 30% of your total energy from fat.
Okay.
And so who's that going to tick off? That's going to be a little bit triggering if you've ever trialed with keto or something that's a little more high fat. So the point of this is not to say, well, Tyler, you missed one of these points.
Yeah.
So you immediately are on your way to an unhealthy diet.
I'm going to die.
Right.
Oh, wait.
The point.
I am going to die eventually.
The point is there's 7, 8, 10, 15 other things, depending on which list you're looking at, that if you're eating 50% of your food from saturated fat, 50% of your total energy from fat, but you're eating 40 grams of fiber per day and you're eating 8 servings of vegetables instead of 5. Like there are so many, there's so much leeway on either end of these spectrums. Like maybe you're getting your blood work done. Maybe you feel freaking great.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's not the point of this list, is for me to sit on my high horse and say, this is what you do. This is what I do. This is what Joey does.
Right.
This is what you should do. This is just a malleable place to start. Because in even looking at fat and saturated fat, we could have a whole episode on this. There are certain saturated fats that are more likely or less likely to cause issues.
Yeah.
So to lump all saturated fats in this bad category, again, just back to the whole sensationalized blanket statement kind of thing, doesn't do anybody any good.
And it seems like, especially going back to your first principle, individualized, it seems like to me, based on my own experience, there's certain things that work for certain people and don't work at all for other people.
How can you sustain what you're doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I know when it finally made sense to me was just comparing allergies. Like if one person can be allergic to cats and another person can be allergic to peanuts, and neither of those things inherently is bad or is actually should be hurting you, but your body's react in a very different way to them, why would it not be different with food as well?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think just, high carbs have just been so normalized in society. And I think that's partially why keto and Atkins have worked for people, at least short term, because how trained is it to say it's okay? You get a bagel in the morning or toast and that's all you eat.
Right.
And then you have a sandwich at lunch.
Right.
And I know for me, I can have different kind of sandwiches. Like we got like a fundraiser hoagie and it's literally a loaf of bread.
Yes.
Like if you looked at this objectively, like you just would eat a whole loaf of bread if you looked at it separately with like 2 slices of meat. Yeah. Or I'll get something like Dave's Killer Bread, which is made with all whole grains, higher protein, higher fiber to at least mitigate the carbs that are inherently in bread.
Sure.
You can get small slices and you have a sandwich that way. Like those are 2 totally different ways to have the same thing.
Yeah.
But I think for me and for a lot of people at the most basic level, look at your carb intake. I think for a lot of people, that's what's too high.
And when you say carbs, there's a difference. There's the fibrous carbs and non-fibrous carbs.
Definitely. Yes. So of course, the main things to look at are back to the potato chip thing. Well, I only eat like a handful here and there. But how many handfuls did you eat? And is the bag gone at the end of the week?
Right.
Those types of things. Do you eat a bagel every morning? Is it white bread based bagel? Or do you have something, again, not to go back to the same brand, but something like more of a multi-grain?
Yeah.
Those kind of things to really genuinely look at the carbs level itself. I know for me to lose weight, that's the first thing I can do is start cutting back on carbs. It is the most basic level. And then, like you said, the simple versus complex is huge. So yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with going keto or Atkins because I think it's okay to shock the system for a little bit, but is that sustainable? For you, it is.
Right.
And then there's the other angle of health. Yes, weight is number one. Definitely. I think that there's too much interplay with diabetes, long-term conditions, and heart issues. But if that means that you are constantly filling up with processed foods, and you never eat organic produce, it's got some heavy metals in it. You're eating the same type of things all the time. You're not varying. You're not eating the rainbow. You're not getting different nutrients that way. So maybe again, you're not taking in proper amount of nutrients. You're getting some heavy metal exposure. The meats you're eating have hormones and antibiotics because you're always grabbing, meat from McDonald's or, the cheapest you can. And I know some people, you have to do what you have to do. Everybody's back to the individualized part, but there are processes and effects on the body that can come from those kind of things too. So there's so many different ways to look at it. But I do think that, looking at it individually, in terms of what you can do to sustain what you're doing in a healthy way, and just take the most basic things, up the amount of vegetables. If you're overweight and unhealthy, up the amount of vegetables, up the amount of fruits, whole grains, try to limit saturated fat, have some nuts, eat all the different types of foods. Red and processed meat's okay. Lower it. I think those are all basic things that, that people can agree on overall.
Okay. All right. You said less than 30% of your calories from fat. Mm-hmm. That was one of the specifics you were going to try and point out.
Yes.
What were some others? Yeah.
So in no specific amount, incorporate an array of nuts, legumes, whole grains, seafood, in which Joey already mentioned. And so it's funny, in the World Health Organization's list, it just says greater than 0 is the cut point for some of those items.
Okay.
And so it's as I think that's, I kind of like that.
Yeah.
Just start. Yes.
Legumes, that's beans and like sprouts, right? Mm-hmm. What else?
Yeah.
Seafood.
Whole grains.
Okay.
And then I did lump seafood into there.
Okay.
Kind of separately away. That wasn't specifically World Health Organization. This was
sure.
Dante's Health Organization.
Got it.
Version. So
I like it. Okay.
And then aim for 5 servings of fruits and vegetables per day.
5. Okay.
So World Health Organization, they have it as 400 grams.
Okay.
For a lot of us, that means nothing.
Yeah.
So
I don't know what a gram is.
So either test out a scale to see what it looks like, or don't.
Yeah.
And just aim for 5 servings. Quickly Google what a serving of blueberries is, what it looks like. Start from there. Less than 10% of total energy from free sugars.
Okay. What's a free sugar?
Free sugar is considered literally adding sugar to something like a tablespoon of sugar, a teaspoon of sugar to your coffee.
Sure.
Syrups, honey, technically, any other medium that's already present in a packaged food, sugary cereals.
Anything corn syrup.
Yes, stuff like that. And then even fruit and non-fruit juices or concentrates.
Oh, okay.
So go for the actual fruit versus the actual juices.
And that's because the actual fruit will contain other things,
fiber,
and have a bunch of fiber.
Comes back to the food matrix perspective. Yes, which is huge.
Okay.
And then speaking of fiber, try to consume greater than 25 grams of fiber per day, maybe 30, 35.
Okay.
And so what's 25 grams? Doesn't mean a whole lot to us, but I can assure you, if you're hitting 5 servings of fruits and vegetables per day, you're probably going to hit your fiber goal or be pretty close to it. So there's these the ways of doing it are sort of built in.
Yeah.
If you start to hit 1 or 2,
yeah.
It lends itself to this scaffolding of this now nice looking diet that you've built. We talked about the fat perspective, the total fat.
Right.
Try to consume less than 10% of your total energy from saturated fats. And so, like I said, there's even a little bit of nuance there. And so a lot of processed meats, a lot of red meats, they tend to be higher in saturated fat. That's not like a jab against them. I eat plenty of red meat, but something to be mindful of.
Sure.
There's even certain sources of dairy that have higher percentages of saturated fats.
Of course.
That don't have as negative of consequences in terms of cholesterol and cardiovascular disease. And I only say that just to, again, provide a little bit of, color on how complicated that can be.
Yes.
10% is a good cut point. I know if you're not counting your calories, that's a little bit hard. But again, that if we regress to one of the earlier points, it's variation.
Right.
If you're eating steak 3 times a day, that's not variation.
Right.
Will you be okay? Maybe. That's maybe that's okay. But again, if we're just looking more globally, if you can replace one of those, processed meals of meat or meals with steak, if you can process or substitute that with chicken or eggs,
sure,
or fish or one of those, that again pushes you, moves the needle towards that goal, that theoretical goal that's out there of less than 10%.
Okay. So to take it back here for a second, let me see if I can summarize this. We're suggesting that, number one, this is individualized.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the same for everybody. Everybody's going to have some variation on this, and it has to do with genetics and culture and all sorts of things. And so anybody who tells you this is the only way to do it is probably not giving you the whole truth.
Yes.
On a practical level, you should start by figuring out roughly what your body needs to maintain weight right where you are, and then adjust accordingly based on your goals.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want somebody to make a radical, unsustainable change. We would rather somebody, if you need to reduce your weight, instead of dropping down to 500 calories a day, why don't you find out where your maintenance caloric intake is, and then reduce it by 250 calories or 500 calories so that you can keep doing that for the rest of your life instead of crash dieting and then bouncing back. You're saying variance,
mm-hmm.
lots of wide varieties of foods. Try Indian, try Thai, Laotian. I just had Laotian the other day. I love it. It's one of my favorites. You can always buy me lunch at a Laotian restaurant. Try these different things. Eat some vegetables
mm-hmm.
as often as possible. Eat whole grains, lots of fiber. Try to minimize your fat, not going over the top with all of that, and limiting free sugar just in general is
mm-hmm.
a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
I think you pretty much hit it all. And again, we could have made this more of a checklist.
Yeah.
But this was sort of and this is what I struggled with in trying to put this together. It's a mixture of global principles that we can spitball back and forth. And then it is more or less a list of characteristics that lend themselves to good health.
Because
that's all it is. You know what I mean? It's kind of part of it. It's almost like
yeah. Cause if I'm going to go become a strong man and start, lifting massive amounts of weight and competing in that, my dietary needs are going to be radically different from the universal. Or if I am morbidly obese, 500 pounds, and I really do need to lose a lot of weight as soon as possible, that's going to require a different perspective as well. But in terms of a universal starting place for most people, these are good guidelines.
These are guidelines, and then these are characteristics of good health.
Principles.
Yes.
If you are looking for a specific eating pattern, if you're looking for a change and you don't mind something a little bit more radical, are there sources, you mentioned a whole bunch of them, are there sources that are reputable and trustworthy to go, okay, I'm a performance athlete and I need to check something out. I need to try something different. Where should I be looking for that information? Yeah,
it's a good question. Personally, I would be able to help with that.
Okay.
Like just as the individual can answer some of those questions.
Yep.
In a more formal sense. I mentioned the Alan Aragon book, and that spells out a lot of, if you're the type of person that wants to bust out the calculator and figure out exactly what your macros need to be and how you need to set that up. The Flexible Dieting book's a great example of that. There's a million people out there that talk about how to calculate macronutrients. There's multiple apps that will set that up for you. Stronger by Science guys have an app that does that. And then I would say, for the sake of doing it, I would just check out the USDA dietary guidelines for Americans. I would check out I would just reread the World Health Organization's recommendations, not even recommendations. It's just like a checklist of a healthy diet.
Sure.
And just realize that it's not that extreme.
Okay.
Like, just check those things out. Try to put that up against maybe like some of the stuff that we say, some of the stuff that the carnivore guys say, some of the stuff that the all plant-based guys say.
Yeah.
And then just tailor it.
Taste and see. Find out what works for you. But the bottom line is you should not be without a plan. All of the products we talked about with the Sjögrens. The Sjögren's products, all those things that we talked about are available on our website, www.askjoedimatteo.com. That's AskJoedimatteo.com. That is also where you can sign up for our mailing list, be notified when we have things on sale. You can find out about new episodes of this show. You can find episodes of the classic show available as a podcast on there. If you have any questions, we want you to email them to us. That email is questions@askjoedimatteo.com. Anything we referenced, we'll get all of those links in the show notes on the video sites. And if you're only listening, you are missing half the fun because all the shows are available as video as well on YouTube and Rumble. Big thanks to Josiah Schweinberg, who's making us look pretty back there. Michael Deppish, our editor. Joyce Gibb, our nurse practitioner, who handles private consultations. Diane Silverman manages our products. Terry does scheduling. Cecilia does distribution. Joey DiMatteo. Dante DiMatteo. Good to see you, boys. I'm Tyler Andrews. Thanks. That's it for us this week. And now, this is more true than ever in this episode, it is your turn. What are you going to do with what we just told you? Are you going to just enjoy it and listen because it's entertaining? We appreciate that, but we would much rather you take what you learned here and put it into action. Are you going to be part of this Generation Health?